Bangor University is the UK's #1 university for research into accounting, banking and finance. And together with our partners at the Chartered Banker Institute, we provide the home for the Chartered Banker MBA. One of the things we provide for our students and for other banking professionals are a series of continuous professional development workshops. This interview was filmed at one such workshop. Margaret, with scandal after scandal hitting our industry, what is the industry itself and the Institute doing to ensure that the hard-working bankers that are out there trying to rebuild trust are supported?
In October 2011, the Institute and 9 leading banks in the UK launched the Chartered Banker Professional Standards Board. And the board's aim is to raise professionalism in the industry and to restore pride of those who work in the industry. We need to restore not only the trust and confidence of customers, but of our colleagues as well.
So what sort of things has the board been doing since it was formed?
Since it was formed, it's published a code of professional conduct for the industry, and it's published its first foundation standard. Now, lots of people will say there's lots of initiatives to raise professional standards. And actually, and a valid criticism of a number of them is they're just talking shops. But this one is different. It's all about action. The industry, meanwhile, hasn't been sitting there doing nothing in terms of professional standards. And in October last year, we launched the Chartered Banker Professional Standards Board, the CBPSB as we refer to it. It took 2 years to get to that stage, and it started from work that the Institute started to do. But it was launched in October. It's a voluntary initiative. It's supported by 9 leading banks in the UK. So it's a number of the ones that was on Phil's chart plus a few others. So in there you have Barclays, you have Clydesdale and Yorkshire Bank, you have HSBC, ING Direct, RBS, Lloyds, Tesco, Virgin Money and Santander. It's not just the big institutions, you've got some smaller, the new entrants within that piece as well. And that encompasses about 75% of individuals who work in the UK banking sector. I should say, because people say to me, this only covers those operating in retail banking. It doesn't. The 9 banks that have signed up to and are committed to this have signed up to implement in their retail, commercial and wholesale banking operations. The Chartered Banker Professional Standards Board, that's what its aim is, and it is to create a culture of professionalism amongst individuals by creating industry-wide standards which enshrine the very best ethical, professional, technical and behavioural qualities. It isn't just the banks. The board does have an advisory panel which is chaired by Robin Jarvis, and it comprises representatives of consumer groups and business groups around the table. Robin has chaired a number of these types of bodies, particularly at EU level, so he's well versed in these, and they're inputting into the development, into the work of the board, and obviously it has, and underneath it then it obviously has a committee and working groups working through the detail of these proposals. The banks that signed up to it at the end of 2011 signed up to fund it initially for a period of 3 years, so i.e. to the end of 2014, and then obviously we'll see what happens at the end of that.
So what sort of things distinguish this from the talking shops?
The 9 banks who have signed up to this account for 350,000 people who work in the banking industry in the UK. And that's not just retail, It's retail, it's commercial, and it's wholesale banking as well. It goes across the piece. Now, we've published this foundation standard, and the banks themselves are now in the process of implementing that. This is a huge amount of work. One institution alone has 20 people working on the implementation. So that will be rolled out, and we expect significant progress, particularly on the pilots, to be made by the end of June next year, with complete rollout very soon afterwards.
So what are some of the things that have come out as the priorities in terms of the actions that are going to be taken?
Well, I mean, one of the big things is obviously ethical professionalism, doing the right thing all the time for the customers. Right. And as well as increasing the level of professionalism within the industry. I joined the industry many years ago, and in those days, if you wanted to get on, you had to do your banking exams. You wouldn't get to be manager of a branch or work in a senior position in head office without it. Sure. Now that has all changed over recent times. And actually we have less general bankers, qualified general bankers. We've got lots of qualified specialisms, but we don't have that foundation. And we want to restore that, as well as increase the level of qualifications and professionalism of those in specialist roles.
So are we just talking about first-line management level positions, or are we talking about a host of different and appropriate qualifications at varying levels?
We're talking about qualifications, knowledge, and behaviours at all sorts of levels, from a customer service officer in a branch network through to a branch manager, everybody, and particularly not only just the customer facing ones, but particularly the customer facing ones, but everybody else as well. Because one of the commitments in the code is to treat customers, colleagues and stakeholders with appropriate integrity and respect.
So how do we measure that? Because it feels like absolutely the right thing to do. I can't imagine any of our viewers would say that they don't operate in that sphere. But what's the true measure of whether or not somebody is actually achieving what the code is setting out?
Well, obviously, banks have their own performance evaluation programmes, and some banks actually have taken out of their performance measures these days sales, quantities, but it's all around quality and customer service, which is a very good step. And in terms of the specific, say, the foundation standard, individual banks will certify how they are doing against the foundation standard, but we, the Institute, will go in and independently audit and measure their performance. And in addition to that, we're looking at external measures. We've done a poll, a YouGov poll, to benchmark customer views on banks and the level of trust. And we will continue over the coming years to monitor and measure that to see how performance varies. We're looking at other appropriate measures to extend the external environment.
So just to be completely clear here, are we saying that the 9 banks that have signed up are actually agreeing a uniform approach to this, or is there a variation within each of the banks about what is acceptable and what's being audited?
No, what is done is it's a standard code and a standard foundation standard.
Okay.
However, it's up to individual bank how they actually implement it, because all the banks are different. Sure. But actually it's very important that they all do it and we see a change. And we will be auditing how they are doing against the standard. Right. And if we don't think they're implementing it satisfactorily, we will be saying so.
With the change in regulation and the creation of the FCA now going forward, my understanding is that they are very much going to be the consumer's champion and looking at banks' behaviours and standards through the eyes of the customer. So what's the read across from what the board and the standards are doing compared to what the FCA are going to be looking for?
I mean, FCA will be very much more hands-on, right, and they will be looking at a lot of things like product development, like where you start from, how you develop it, what fairness filters you put it through, how you price it, how it's sold. Right. But regulators can't regulate for ethical behaviour. They can look to see how an institution is doing, but actually if they start to do it, and they've said this, all the senior regulators have said this publicly, you can't regulate for ethical behaviour. If you try to do it, you end up with a tick box mentality. And we don't want people behaving about what does the letter of the law say. It's not only what does the letter say, but what does the spirit say. Sure. So the work of the board and the work of the regulator are compatible. They fit together and they work side by side, and we'll be working very closely with them.
Okay. I guess some of the sceptics watching us today will say, it all sounds great, the banks have signed up, but actually if you go in and then audit and they're not achieving what they originally set out to do, what is the implication of that? What teeth do you have as an institute to be able to enforce the adherence to the code?
Well, clearly if an institution isn't complying with it, isn't implementing it properly, we will be talking directly to the senior management, the chairman, chief executive of that institution to find out why not and what is going wrong. But actually equally, the banks are very keen on this, they're very committed to it. They know they have to raise the level, the standards with it across the industry. They have to restore trust and confidence. And actually, if one body isn't doing what it should be, I think you'll get quite a lot of peer pressure because actually it will taint the whole of the work that's been done and the level of commitment to it. At the beginning, commitment to this was signed off by either the chairman or the chief executive of each of those 9 banks. And in addition to the board, we have an advisory panel which comprises representatives of consumers, small businesses, corporates. So it's very much what do they want to see, they look at what we're doing and how that fits with how they think it should be done. And if they felt that this wasn't being taken seriously and institutions weren't doing what they were meant to do, I think they would make that known publicly.
We've talked about the 9 banks, and we're just showing our viewers now who those 9 banks are. And whilst you've said it represents a huge number of employees in the UK, that's obviously not all of the banks in the UK. What's happening regarding recruitment of the other banks who are yet to sign up?
We're talking to a number of others who have expressed an interest, both proactively and reactively on our behalf, because this is not a club that's closed to others. We welcome other banks. They're all welcome to join. And we'd obviously need to be talking to them about how they implement the standard and how we work together going forward.
And that literally is banks of any size and scale that we're looking to recruit?
That's correct.
So what would be the implication for the bank then? If I was a CEO or an MD of a bank and I'm thinking, well, actually making a public commitment is a good thing to do, what am I actually going to be signing up to? And what are the implications for me and for my team of having signed up?
Well, having signed up, they then have to have the programmes to actually implement it.
Right. Okay.
And let's be clear here, we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper because a number of banks already had cultural change programmes, but this is actually giving added emphasis and in some instances widening the scope. So it's actually being sure that they are part of the further development of this, but actually can be seen to be moving with the industry. And I view the code as the baseline, and banks will compete over and above that, but it's raising the standards across the whole of the industry.
And what help and support would be available? I'm thinking particularly of the smaller banks who, again, like the idea and the principle of being able to make a public commitment, but maybe are not sure whether or not they have the infrastructure in place or the plans in place to be able to meet the standard. Where do I start? What help and support is available and from who?
Well, the actual secretariat of the Professional Standards Board would work with them, look to see where their programmes are, work with them on gap analysis, and then how they can develop going forward. Now, what will be very interesting for the smaller banks is as the other banks, the original 9, implement their programmes, as case studies come from that. Right. And that will all help because they'll all be able to see what it is that others have done, how they've done it, and then how that might fit with their own initiatives and their own programmes.
When we started talking, you quickly got into the area of qualifications, and clearly having the appropriate qualifications at the appropriate level is one clear benchmark. What are some of the other aspects to the work that the board are doing over and above achieving qualifications?
Yes, because it's not just qualifications, it's around behaviour. And ethical behaviour, doing the right things, and it's about the culture of the organisation, because this is both for the individual, but it's also for the institution. Right. Okay. And so it's actually making sure that there are change programmes internally to change the culture, and many senior bankers have commented externally on this.
Right. So if I'm working in one of those 9 banks, Where am I in the communication process? Will I have understood this ahead of today's programme? What can I expect to happen in the coming weeks and months?
The answer, there's not a clear-cut answer to that because it depends on which institution.
Yep.
Because they've all had internal communications programmes when this initiative was launched, but because they're at different stages of implementing,
Yes.
then it will vary from institution to institution. But we are, there's regular articles in key magazines like the Chartered Banker to raise the profile around this, and we have had a number of members of the Institute who've read about it in the magazine, haven't yet heard about it from their own internal organisation, coming to us saying, can I have more details?
Yeah, sure. The Institute has obviously been pivotal in all of this. Can you explain a little bit more about their role and whether or not somebody actually has to be a member of the Institute in order to really get the true benefits of the work that the board are doing?
The Institute was instrumental in setting this up. They worked for quite a long period of time before the launch of this initiative in October last year. And they provide the secretariat to the Professional Standards Board. It's important to realise, though, that actually people can meet the foundation standards by means of years of experience as well as a number of different qualifications. It doesn't have to be a chartered banker qualification, and you don't have to be a member of the Institute in order to meet the foundation standard. Okay. However, people who satisfying the foundation standard, maybe through qualifications of a very wide range of them, or experience, years on the job, demonstration of commitment, etc., might actually qualify for level of membership of the Institute if they wish to take that up, with all that gives and an ability to progress further.
Okay, so we've got the Institute in its key role there. We've got the 9 banks that are signed up at this moment in time. Is anybody else involved in this initiative at the moment, and what are the plans going forward?
Well, we have been talking to some of the other institutes about how we extend this. And we know that there's a Parliamentary Commission on professional standards, and actually looking about how maybe it might need an independent oversight board which would cover not just retail banking, but the whole of wholesale banking and wealth management and other areas. So that those discussions are at a very early stage, but nevertheless we are talking to other institutes. I just want to talk about the parliamentary inquiry into banking standards and some of the work that the industry is doing in terms of trying to improve those banking standards and how we see the possibility of those two merging and fitting together. Right, the Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards was established in July this year. It is a joint committee of both houses of Parliament, so it has 5 members of the House of Commons on it and 5 members of the House of Lords sitting on it. It met for the first time on the 24th of July, and it has a very, very tight timetable to work on. It has to report no later than the 18th of December on any legislative proposals and any other proposals it may have thereafter, very quickly thereafter. Now, one question we need to think about is, why have we got a parliamentary commission? It's not very often that we get these things. We're all used to members of the industry, chairman, chief executives, appearing in front of either the Treasury Select Committee or its equivalent in the House of Lords. And last year we had the Vickers Commission, which Phil talked about, which again we hadn't really had. This time we've now got a parliamentary commission. Why? Well, I think really at the end of the day it was a political decision to go this route, because we've had huge demand for committee on banking standards, and we had a number of politicians and other eminent people calling for a Leveson type inquiry into this profession. There was clearly no desire by government to go that route, but they wanted to do something which was over and above a select committee inquiry, but not quite a Leveson. So we've ended up with this parliamentary commission. It has powers which a select committee doesn't have. For instance, it can appoint specialist advisors who can then question people appearing in front of the Commission. Now, whilst we haven't got full details as to how the Commission is going to operate, I think we're going to see, as well as the formal sessions that are televised by Parliamentary TV, we will see it operating in many ways like the Vickers Commission in some ways, in as much as it already has quite a large secretariat, which comprises people who work within Parliament, as well as secondees from FSA, from the Treasury, whole raft of people who will provide them with support over and above the support which a normal select committee gets. What's it been set up to do? Well, the terms of reference to consider and report on professional standards and culture in the UK banking sector, taking account of regulatory and competition investigations into the LIBOR rate setting process. Lessons to be learned about corporate governance, transparency, conflicts of interest and their implications for regulation and government policy. Now, I read that out word by word, which is pretty boring because that's very important, and I think we need to remember actually that's a very wide remit. They can effectively go wherever they want to with that remit. In terms of LIBOR, clearly we've got Martin Wheatley, the CEO designate of the FCA, looking at that at the moment. Is it sustainable? What changes have to be made? He will report before the Commission will report, so I'm sure they'll be studying his report in great detail as to whether or not they think that is adequate or whether they think more is required over and above that. But you know, it is a very wide remit. It will operate in terms of, it will take written submissions, it will have the great and the good sitting in front of them asking questions, and actually I wonder if they will do what Vickers did, which was to have a few public sessions around the country where, you know, really the man on the street gets to have a say and a voice. I mentioned it's working to a very tight timetable, and at the end of July it issued an initial set of questions which they wanted answered, and their closing date for responses was the 24th of August. Now, many of us in this room will have spent many years responding to European consultations, government consultations, FSA consultations, and you know, better regulation principles say you get longer than 4 weeks, particularly during the summer period, to respond to something as major as this. But they don't have the time frame in order to do that. So we will find further requests operating on a very tight time frame. Now, their initial questions, I've summarised them here, were: to what extent are professional standards absent or defective? How do they compare with other professions and countries? What were the consequences for consumers, businesses and the wider economy? The causes of the problems, and what should be done to address these weaknesses? Well, we don't know how many responses they've had yet. My guess would be they've had a lot of responses. The Chartered Banker Institute did put in a response, and in summarising our response, basically we said that professional standards weren't absent, but they were defective. They could have been better. That there were many causes of this sort of defectiveness in standards, including many years ago, banking was seen as a lifetime structured career. That's moved. We've had a movement away from stewardship to sales. We've had a tick box approach to regulation and compliance. So this whole issue of we will comply with the letter of the law, but actually what about the spirit of the law? And I personally have sat in meetings at the FSA in the past when companies, not banks, other financial institutions, have sat there saying, well, actually, if we just did this, then we would comply, but we can still do X. And actually, you know, that may be not the way that that was intended to operate. Really, professionalism in banking has been devalued over the years as a result of a whole raft of things: recruitment processes, onboarding, lack of encouragement for people to take professional exams, not necessarily just banking exams, but professional exams. So we believe there's a raft of reasons why we've had this change. Clearly, consequences for consumers, businesses, level of trust has sunk, dropped dramatically. But whatever survey you see about level of trust in the industry, they invariably, low level of trust in the industry per se, but a much greater level of trust in their own bank, their own financial institution. Never quite worked that one out, but I think that comes down to the people that they deal with on a day-to-day basis, weekly basis, whatever it is. And I think that's the reason for that change.
So finally then, Margaret, if you were to sum up all things that have happened so far and what the next stages are in just a few words, what would they be?
I think it's excitement about what we've done to date, because actually, as I said earlier on, it's not just a talking shop. This is real action, real progress. Sure. To get this foundation standard out there was a huge step forward. Yep. Now, this isn't the end. This is just the beginning of a journey. Yep. And we believe the Professional Standards Board is a solid foundation on which to move forward. And we've been encouraging Andrew Tyree and the members of the Commission to take that on board and develop that as we go forward.
Well, I wish you good luck as you take it forward. It's a key part of re-establishing trust in our industry. All of us will benefit if you're successful. Good luck.
Thank you.